I'm going to try to challenge myself today to read somewhat well from a script. The reason being is that I realized that I haven't actually posted a biography or a really succinct autobiography. I've been working toward an autobiography, but because of emotional blockages, it has been hard to articulate in a very succinct form what that is. Of course, I have actually written books and I've written varieties of autobiographies trying to overcome the blockages and actually succeeding to some degree in different instances and to various extents. And I do think even the blockages themselves are instructive. They tell us, well, this is a point of trauma, this is a point in history and an experience where the person was unable to process the emotion relating to that event because maybe they had not enough knowledge. Maybe they had not enough sort of pipeline of emotional sustenance or support. It becomes difficult then because then the flow of knowledge and understanding gets cut off, and that is also very instructive. So don't doubt that the negative or the blockages have no instruction. They have a lot of instruction for us to understand how these occur, to understand how limits of knowledge and limits of emotional awareness are imposed. That's very important, maybe even more important than anything else. Because if you understand where the block occurs and how it occurs, then you can unblock and you can stop it from occurring. But if you just understand that there is knowledge on the positive side, on the non-blocked side, or you understand that there is awareness, well, then you might take that too much for granted and you might assume that that's always the way it is or almost always the way it has to be. And for some people, regrettably, they don't have access to a complete flow of knowledge. They are very much cut off from what's important, even at an emotional level, even at the level of processing their own self-awareness and somehow developing the tools and sophistication to come to terms with historical events. None of this should be taken for granted, and that's really a fundamental aspect of what I'm trying to get across. But somebody provoked me, or not in a bad way, but somebody requested that I state some things, and then I realized I hadn't actually made a biography concerning what I'm about and what I experienced, and in some sense what this YouTube channel may be about, in a more updated sense, because the updated sense is a sense of where hopefully one has overcome some of these blocks and blockages, and you can therefore make a more coherent, more believable, hopefully, statement. I myself feel it to be more true, more resonant, and therefore in my own mind more realistic. A more realistic version of history, but it's very hard to get to when you have those blockages. You sort of sometimes go awry, you make mistakes, you can at times take a wrong turn and make errors on your way to understanding, and that's a big problem, or a small, I don't know if it's a big or a small problem. It is a problem. You feel it as a unfortunate hurdle or unfortunate waste of energy and time when you deduce something on your way to the truth, to a better sense of reality. You deduce something incorrectly. You've got to kind of reconsider and retrace your steps. That's a hardship at the very least. So It's not an easy or direct road, and that's something that we need to understand. Like some people say, oh, well, if you were telling us the truth, you would be spilling it forth in the most direct and obvious manner, otherwise you must be hiding or holding something back. It's not right, it's not true, that is not exact. We do make errors in terms of our own cognition, especially if we haven't been told or informed what's true. We can come to the wrong conclusions at times, but then if we are honest and true and dedicated and forthright and have integrity, we keep pursuing the truth, and we kind of try as best we can to overcome the untruths on our way to the core, the fundamental reality of our being, which I think to a large extent is comprised of historical truth, history as such. So I'm just going to try to read something that I wrote as a biography in response to a question. And I guess please bear with me in reading this, because translating reading into proper vocalization, well, that is that is a task in itself. Those are really two totally different levels of thinking. Actually, it uses different brain parts, different levels of processing. So let me just read my biography so that people may understand better what this channel is about. I'll try to read it slowly and clearly. Right. So a bit of background at first. I grew up in Rhodesia during a time of war. My father fought in the army for the ideals of white Christian civilization, a very masculine ideal. And after 15 years, when the war was lost, he began bashing me, taking out his rage and disappointment about how things had turned out on me. He also swore to bring me up in a Rhodesian way, with a really strict military standard of discipline, as it turned out, and no mistakes allowed, not even the normal growing pains. He also expressed his hatred of women and of emotion, and took revenge against the New World, against you. In other words, the modern Western world, which he, I guess, would have associated with liberalism, by sticking to the old ways, at least in relation to me, ways of corporal punishment and harsh discipline. And that's how I became emotionally repressed in the first place. But I had no idea of how much rage I had against my father, and also with how much rage was induced to me because of how I had been treated as a newcomer to the Western world. I had not been permitted to express emotion growing up after the age of 12 or 13, when Rhodesia turned into Zimbabwe. Actually, it's probably more like the age of 11 and a half, that the pressure on me intensified. And my father upped the ante of his rage against whatever values he thought I innately represented by being female. If I represented liberalism to him, or I represented actually also in some respect his mother to him, it caused him to burst out in a fit of rage, and I had no idea where that came from. Although, while I was in Africa still, I remained there, I still had a large degree of adaptation culturally to the situation. Most people there are, in fact, emotionally kind of repressed, at least in the sense that they're not emotional individuals yet. They work as a team or as a collective, and it's not a lot of emotional pressure on an individual to explain themselves or account for themselves, because people are using a shared value of a shared system of moral values. and you appeal to those. You don't appeal to your perfect individual integrity or your perfect individual morality. It's not so difficult to get people to see that you've been wronged and that they ought to set things to rights. But so long as I was in Zimbabwe, I was okay. When I came to the West, I was isolated out in the cold totally, and I had to fend for myself. Not just as a migrant, but as an individual, which I hadn't been brought up to be. I had not been brought up to be an individual. I had been brought up to be a collectivist who could count on the power of the collective to defend me should something go awry, and it did. I became emotionally repressed after migrating, and perhaps even before that, but it wasn't significant before that in that cultural milieu. I had no idea how much rage I had against my father, and as well as with how I was treated as a newcomer to a new culture at the age of 15 and onwards, and onwards and onwards. I had not been permitted to express emotion growing up. Remember, it was a time of war, better not to express your emotions. It was even in the men taught not to do. That's the background. When I came to Australia at the age of 15, I found people here, where I am already, had predetermined ideas about me, political notions, prefabricated, indoctrinated ideas. And that was weird because I hadn't told them anything. I hadn't been here, but the media had been working over time. I was very shy, but they thought I was arrogant. I had no idea how to conduct myself in modernity. I was very keen to do the right thing. I asked questions, but people presumed only that I was seeking attention in an unwarranted way. Also, they had been told that I was racist, egoistic, and superior. Interestingly enough, because in that African society, either black or white, egoism hadn't yet appeared. This is a modern phenomenon, totally. Even if we are wrong ideologically, and we Africans of all sorts have been, it's not an egoistic wrongness. That's Western, that's modern, definitively. But I was viewed as egoistic and holding ideas of superiority, none of which I had been aware of. I had been in a situation where basically the Rhodesian women were taking on a sort of quasi-military role, in civil society. They were really strict, very strong, kind of lieutenants. That was the society I had been part of, and the men were on the peripheries of the society, really out in actual war. I didn't fit in and had no way of relating to anything about me. And so that was when the stress of not being able to adapt or to understand the new situation I was in took its toll. My father felt I'd let him down. He began bashing me, sometimes physically, sometimes emotionally, trying to install proper Christian values into me to set me back on the right path. I was off the rails because I was suffering emotionally and wasn't able to completely adapt without any assistance. And then on the other side, people were, the new culture, people there were angry at me as well, because they thought, well, of course, they had been indoctrinated to think I was arrogant. And I didn't feel like I had to, comply or conform. I just didn't know what that meant. Actually, they hadn't explained it to me. Totally different society, like jumping from kind of like the 1870s or something around that time into the 1980s. They say, oh, you don't understand what we're expecting of you. You must be arrogant and conceited. And, I got this kind of flack. And then my father, when he saw this was happening, he bashed me again, because that's what he did. And my constitution got weakened. I got immune problems, and I got allergies, as you might under extreme stress and incomprehension at an age where you can't really adapt without assistance, or even grow up really without assistance. But I had only reprimands. So during that time, without knowing it, I developed a lot of rage. I had to repress emotion, or my father would lay into me emotionally, sometimes physically. And I began to feel if I was developing a negative emotion, that was a danger to me. Instinctively, I would repress it. I would feel very pained at the negative emotion of sadness, despair, or in fact rage welling up, and I would discipline myself before it could reach the surface of my knowledge. And consequently, that did me a lot of harm. I could actually feel myself repressing that rage, and if I had to repress rage, I would get sick. I would catch a virus and come down with it and not recover. Really not. Even after 2 years, I would still be lingering with it, can't really get over that virus. And then I'd suddenly, sort of I'd start to feel a little bit better, and I'd come down with another flu virus. That situation was endless. I'm going to probably, there is more to say. I'm going to probably leave this here because I guess it should be broken down a lot more. There was a way that I eventually found out to get out of that situation. It wasn't easy and it wasn't cheap, but through very, very strong self-discipline, saving my energy, and a very, very strong determination, I did finally get through it, did finally heal myself, but it was a long journey indeed, very hard, very horrific. Hello, so what I want to do now is to finish what I had started before, which was to present the narrative of my life as it has transpired in a straightforward way, or a relatively straightforward way. Of course, there are many cultural and political and psychological factors that were involved in all of this. This is not really easy to relate in a very straightforward way, because life, in my case, hasn't given me something very straightforward to work with. Anything but, in fact. Anything but. And it took me a long time to figure out some of the ways I had been situated in life, and to try to see why things were occurring in the way that they were occurring. So my life has had all these little hidden little pitfalls, hidden man traps, things that I wouldn't have known about, and in effect which came into existence before I was even born. And things to do with my ancestors, things to do with broader scales of politics, issues to do with racism, all these things that I was born surrounded by, but I had no choice about, and really no deep level knowledge about either. I was incredibly naive. That's, by the way, one of the ways that I had been set up to fail, because right-wing culture, especially of the extreme sort I had been brought up in, likes to keep its women as naive as possible, not just about politics, but about matters of sexuality and relationships, and really anything at all. So by not being informed, I was kept innocent, but that innocence cost me my health for a period of time, and in other ways as well, uh, because I had to use all my own effort really to learn about my situation, and I wasn't told, and it wasn't passed down to me as family knowledge or any kind of through any kind of natural process like that. I had to really exert energy to get where I am today, which is healthy. Now, the second part of my story, I will probably just recap a little bit, not too much, but I'll start with probably something I may have said before, and then I'll continue and talk about generally my recovery process. Let's go to the text. We can find it. So my father had developed this attitude that I was letting him down. Actually, he was letting me down. Both my parents were in effect letting me down by parentifying me and expecting me to be the mature one that led the way into the new culture. Grew up by myself, never made any mistakes, never had any difficulties in any way, or else that was considered to be a failure. But so the normal growing pains were failures in my father's eyes. When I left home, I ended up in a house where the person who had the lease in his name and who had advertised for other people to stay in that house was actually an NPD, a narcissist, and his friend, his female friend who knew him, said, "He's a narcissist." That was the first time I heard the term. And she said, "You girls, you just better go, because he's not a very nice person, and you really shouldn't stay here. Don't worry, I'll just tell him, I'll tell him you've gone. You don't say anything to him." And so I realized that there was something very, very wrong with that person. He was very sadistic, and immediately he sort of developed a sort of cult leader mentality and became punitive. This leasee, and so we left, and his girlfriend, who was also a narcissist, delighted in saying to him, "Your girls have gone. I don't know where they've gone. They're just not here. I noticed." So and my father became enraged when I asked him. I didn't have transport, so could you help me move my stuff to another place? He became enraged that I wasn't submitting to authority, and I wasn't complying with the very, very bad state of affairs that I'd found myself in. And his fury was unfathomable and very extensive. So that's how my father was. He would bash me if I had a growing pain, or if I required his assistance, or if anything was not quite smooth in life, he would bash me. It's what he did. And so that's why I became weakened. And I did need parents, but I didn't have parents. I had people who would bash me if there was a bump in the road in life. The bigger the bump, the more I got bashed. So basically I repressed all my own distress, my rage that was also growing, and I didn't express emotion because that was dangerous and distasteful to me, having been brought up in a British stiff upper lip manner, more British than British in the colonies. That was distasteful to my father's emotion was distasteful to me, and my emotion was distasteful, but also I was unable to express emotion, really. So I struggled with a weaker constitution. Where I hit rock bottom was in the workplace situation. It was a dysfunctional workplace, and I was kind of a sitting duck. I didn't know the culture, still trying to learn it. I was very idealistic, very reverential, but naive about politics, naive about psychology, as I had been brought up to be. And it was basically a situation where the sort of somewhat narcissistic people in the workplace basically dumped their garbage onto me and gained some release from their own stress by provoking pain and stress in me through manufacturing complaints and making it very difficult to cope because there were too many petty complaints about one thing or another. And that's basically, even at that time, without knowing about psychology, I sensed that they were manufacturing these complaints to help reduce their own stress levels. And I was basically also the fall guy for a system, I believe, a computer system, a data system that didn't really work, and somebody had purchased that system, and it had to look like I was just failing to use it properly, rather than that it was kind of a white elephant, should never have been purchased in the first place. And yes, there were other complications there too, because of my stigmatized African or Rhodesian specifically background. I was considered to be fair game in a nominally left-wing workplace. So I eventually succumbed to the stress that I'd been warding off, and my digestive system broke down. That was when I reached rock bottom. And I felt that I just lost all social status or even any sense of what I had been trying to achieve, which was to prove to my father that I could actually succeed and that I was a worthwhile person, and to prove that to myself. And that was a terrifying situation for me. Really very, very painful indeed, like being skinned alive. And then I moved from a state of being very anxious, very nervous about succeeding and pleasing others and getting approval in a new society, to a state of, gosh, it doesn't matter anymore. This is as bad as it gets. This is failure. This is loss of hope and social status. And funnily enough, when I reached that point, not only did I feel intense rage building up for the first time, I could actually feel that emotion, which had been there all that time, but I also felt a very strange peace. Very much the calm in the middle of the storm. And so that was the beginning when I started again from having had a very Christian, idealistic background. I knew that I had to change my ways and means to adapt and be able to prevent these kinds of attacks from coming in anymore. And I began to look into Nietzschean philosophy. And interestingly enough, that was very, very healthy for me and very supportive for me to change from this narrow Christianity to something much more psychological and lively and human. And so there it is. That's what I did, and that was the turnaround where my health began to improve suddenly, and then gradually over time.